We all have people in our life with different levels of intimacy. We gauge our time and effort in the relationship based on the commitment that we've made to each other. Relationships can get a bit tricky when grief comes to your door. Grief brings a level of vulnerability that puts you in a place where you may lose your ability to think and perform on a day-to-day basis with clarity. Often when someone in your life don't get what they want from you, it may turn to shaming to manipulate you to get what they want. Today, I'm going to teach you how to manage shaming by giving you the tools you need in advance to help you have clarity in decision making, even in the midst of grief. Are you lost in the chaos of grief, struggling to find your way in the darkness? Are you asking yourself, will I ever be able to enjoy life again? Are you wondering where God is right now? Welcome to the Grief Mentor Show. This podcast is a safe place for you. It will shine a light into the shadows, helping you discover that joy and pain can coexist, that you still have purpose, and there is a path to peace. Hello, friend. I'm Teresa Davis. I, too, was lost in the chaos of grief the day my son died. Just like you, I longed for peace in this unfamiliar world. I longed for the weight crushing my chest to be lifted so I could breathe. I clung tightly to the anchor, and it was there that I discovered the tools I needed to navigate life after loss. And I'm ready to help you do the same. If you're ready, I'm holding my hand out to you, friend. Let me show you the way, one step at a time. So it's January 9th, and you're facing a new year. The thought of a new year can bring hope, and it can bring despair. My prayer for you is that you can face the new year with hope. Sometimes all we need is someone to help us see a perspective that we've not been able to see on our own. Maybe you're not sure that that's possible, but I'm here to encourage you that it is. Maybe you're asking, what does a grief mentor session look like? It's a 1 hour of one-on-one time with you and I. We can do this over Zoom, which I prefer, or if you don't have the option for Zoom, we can do it over the phone. After you purchase the session, you'll be redirected to my calendar. There you will find a few questions that I ask you to answer to help me prepare for our time together. Then you'll be able to book your call at a time that works for you. In this first session, we're going to start exactly where you are with your biggest pain point or hurdle of grief. That one thing that keeps your mind from resting and reaching that place of peace that you long to experience. There's no obligation to move past that first session. That'll be totally up to you. After our time together, you'll receive notes that I've prepared for you from the session so that you can review and refresh your mind with the hope and truth for your journey. You will also receive a workbook that coincides with our session that will reinforce what you learned on our call together. Since I've started my journey of helping others manage their grief, I've had some interesting inquiries from folks that has stretched me and created a need for me to establish some boundaries that would help me in advance to prepare for conflict in the form of shaming. Now, just like you, I experienced this in my grief journey as well. That was the teaching ground for me to learn what I needed to survive in those moments. The research that I have done on the subject of boundaries is extensive, and I want to share it with you today. Let's talk a minute about predictable behavior. What does that mean? Well, to make it simple, predictable behavior is a set of responses that are predictable based on a person's learned behavior. Now, let's break that down a little bit. The reason we respond in the moment the way we do is because we have, quote, learned that it brings us success. Most of us learn very quickly what works and what doesn't in relationships. If a particular response brings success and delivers what we want, then the odds are that's going to become a trait that we incorporate into our daily life. That's what predictable behavior means. It's predictable based on the person's habits and traits that you have witnessed before. Here's the thing. When you're grieving, your spidey senses are a bit dull. It's not as easy to read and pick up on things like predictable behavior, and that makes you vulnerable to others in ways that is not good. The definition of bereaved is torn apart. The last thing you need is someone in your life that is attempting to tear you down even further. You've heard me say over and over on this podcast, if you are a consistent listener, that you need to surround yourself with safe people. And this is why. Today, I want to give you tools to manage shaming. Because if you haven't experienced this in your grief journey, you probably have experienced this in your life in general. People that lean toward bullying, and shaming is a form of bullying, do so to get something from you that you're not willing to give. So how do you manage that? First, I want to teach you how to recognize the verbiage that precedes an attempt to shame you into providing or performing what the ask is of the person trying to persuade you to do so. Shaming statements attempt to belittle, degrade, humiliate, insult, embarrass, all with the intent to manipulate you into being what they need you to be. They are attempting to force you into meeting their expectations of what they need from you. Now, how do you know if you are experiencing bullying in the form of shaming? This is how. By evaluating how you feel when you're with this person. Do they lift you up? Are they a breath of fresh air to you? When you leave their presence, do you feel pleasant and look forward to spending time with them again? Or do you walk away feeling flawed, inadequate, or less than because you feel you didn't meet their demands? Listen, this is very important for your mental health. So stick with me because I'm going to teach you how to manage this. It's important to get a plan in place before it happens, and I'll explain why. So what do you do about it? Number one, learn to recognize shaming behavior. And basically, that's what we just covered. Number two, you're going to create a set of non-negotiables. Well, what's that mean? A set of non-negotiables is a set of boundaries that you create in advance that will guide you to manage your responses to people that attempt to manipulate you into meeting their expectations in a way that does not fit your boundaries. Now, that was a lot, so let me say it again. Number one, you're going to learn to recognize shaming. Number two, you're going to create that set of non-negotiables, which is a set of boundaries. You're going to set these boundaries in advance, so when this behavior comes, it doesn't take you off guard, right? Because remember what we said about grieving? You're vulnerable. You're already torn apart. You're not functioning with the clarity that you normally function with. So you're easily taken advantage of. I'm trying to teach you how to safeguard yourself against from being manipulated. All right? So these boundaries are things you're going to set up in advance so that you can have a set of responses for people that attempt to manipulate you into meeting their expectations in a way that does not fit your boundaries. Now, to do this, we need to understand what God's Word says about it. To be clear, the Bible has much to say about boundaries. The Word of God is saturated with them. Ever read the 10 Commandments? How about the tree in the Garden of Eden? God said, don't eat from it. Matthew 5:37 says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Well, if you don't live by a set of boundaries, how do you know when to say yes? How do you know when to say no? But here's the thing that I want to point out. Most people get confused about boundaries, thinking they are meant to be punitive. Boundaries are not punitive. Okay, listen closely. Every boundary that was set by God was set for our own good. They are meant not to tear down, but to build up. Okay, so when you are creating your set of boundaries, your set of non-negotiables, you need to keep that in mind. The boundaries that you set are for your good, to help you create a space around you to be safe, to be able to manage your grief. To reiterate, they are not meant to tear anyone down, but to build up. Okay, and they're set beforehand because Acts 17:26 tells us from one man he created all the nations throughout the whole earth. He decided beforehand when they should rise and fall, and he determined their boundaries. Now, why do you think that he did that beforehand? When we create something in advance, it eliminates the emotion that tries to overcome us in the moment. You want to know how to recognize the voice of shame? God never condemns. And that's what shaming is. Shaming is a form of bullying, and it's meant to condemn, criticize, denounce, to tell you you're bad, you're not worthy, that there's no hope of reconciliation. That is not the voice of God, friend. God's voice convicts. Well, what does that mean? Convicts means he brings to light or exposes things to make us aware of things that we need to change. Okay, that sounds much different than declaring you less than and not worthy, doesn't it? Now, God's boundaries all come with consequences for crossing those boundaries. And I'm going to show you some of that. But the voice of God never shames. Friend, surround yourself with people that mimic the voice of God. Now, number 3, there's a correct way to implement a boundary and a wrong way to implement a boundary. To learn the correct way to deliver a boundary, we're going to follow God's examples. With every boundary God set in His Word, it was followed with a consequence. For example, eat from all the fruits in the garden except this one, because if you do, you will surely die. Now, this is a special story for me because He used this story to teach me so much in my grief journey, especially how to understand the curse of death. God's heart's desire was never for any of us to experience death. That's why He warned Adam, don't eat from this tree. For his own good, He told him that. Because when the enemy succeeded in convincing Adam and Eve that God had lied, they ate from the tree, and the consequences that came was death. And it became a part of everyone's life that walks the face of this earth. Well, maybe with a few exceptions, and that's another story for another day. Once you've set your non-negotiables, okay, you're going to deliver them with 3 steps. And here are the 3 steps. Number 1, inform. Number 2, be direct. And number 3, deliver with love. For example, the first time this person crosses your boundaries, you need to inform them what your boundary is by being direct and clear. Remember, we're going to follow God's example. So they clearly understand if they cross the boundary in the future, this will be the consequence. Remember what I said about having a plan in place in advance removes the emotion of the moment. So you feel prepared so that it doesn't take you off guard and possibly trigger you into some heavy emotion. Planning ahead when you're grieving for unexpected moments takes the sting out of the moment when it comes. When God put the boundary in place, He attached a consequence, a clear one, to it. Now, did He love Adam and Eve? Yes, He did. I did a whole episode on this story called The Devil Belongs in the Pit, Not You. Because the depth of this story holds the person responsible for what happened in the garden. For the details of that story, go and listen to that episode. I'll link it for you in the show notes. Keep in mind that our boundaries do change, because the way we manage our grief grows as we grow. Just because you may have a hard boundary on a certain thing in one area or another doesn't mean that it will always be that way. Listen to the still small voice, and He will guide you. The way you feel will guide you as your vulnerability begins to lessen. You will be able to lighten up on some of those boundaries that you've created. They are always in progress. Let me recap. Okay? In order to be able to manage expectations are beyond what you are able to deliver, you need to be able to create a set of healthy boundaries. To be able to manage the situation, you're going to implement these 3 steps. Learn to recognize shaming behavior. Number 2, create a set of non-negotiables. And number 3, you're going to deliver those boundaries in a healthy, respectable way by informing, being direct and delivering with love. I pray this episode blessed you today, and it's given you tools that you need to manage your grief with grace and love while protecting your space to grieve in a healthy manner. Want to go deeper on this subject of managing boundaries while grieving? Book a call with me today at thegriefmentor.com. I look forward to hearing from you. And that's all I have for you today. So until next time, take care. Are you a Grief Mentor Insider? I have a free grief survival guide on my website and a song list that I have created along the way in my grief journey. I would love to share that with you. Visit thegriefmentor.com's website and join today. Did today's episode touch your heart? I pray that it did. Did you walk away a little lighter? If you did, would you share this episode with someone that you know needs to hear it? And could you take 30 seconds to leave me a review on Apple Podcast? I would so appreciate it if you did. From my heart to yours, see you next week.